So apparently there are two kinds of people. Those who believe that a PC case should only be a simple but functional box that is just meant to hold your components and nothing else. And then there are those that will happily spend a lot more money just to get something that's a bit more special, that has some extra features, for example, that has some extra lights, or it just has a more unique design. And this MSI Maestro 700L PZ was definitely made for that second group. It is a premium panoramic style case with a brushed aluminum chassis and a curved tempered glass side. It is heavy, it is built really well, it looks beautiful, it is very elegant, but it will also cost you $400 in the US or about 400 euros here in Europe, which is a very hefty price for a PC case. So let's check it out, let's see how it performs, and let's see if we can somehow justify this extreme price tag. Let's begin. This Maestro 700L doesn't really have the most original design. It is another panoramic dual chamber case with a glass side and a glass front that we've been seeing a lot in the past year or two. But there is a very good reason these cases are so popular. Dual chamber designs are very easy to build and very easy to cable manage, and the panoramic glass panel will let you see your build fully and just add a bit more to the overall aesthetics of the case. That especially so if you have a lot of RGB lights or a custom cooling, for example. Now, since this is a dual chamber case, it is a bit wider than your regular tower case would be, but it is not that tall and it will still fit nicely on a regular sized desk. But where this case really stands out is the build quality. The glass panel is curved, there are no edges to worry about, and the aluminum chassis is 2.5 millimeters thick all around, which makes the whole construction very rigid and very sturdy. Plus, it has the same curve as the glass, connecting the top and the side panel. And it just gives off that high-end impression straight away. But do keep in mind that brushed aluminum is very sensitive to fingerprints, and if you touch it, you will have to clean it, which can be a very big inconvenience for some people. I mean, it's going to be fine if you just put it somewhere and then occasionally clean around the power button, but if you do touch it a lot, you will have to clean it all the time. On the back, we can see that every case has its own unique number, so I thought that there will be a limited number of these cases with a max of 999 pretty much, but MSI said that there is a limited number for launch models only, so newer models might not have that number label at all. The I/O is found at the top of the case, and it includes one USB Type-C and two USB Type-A connections, so you don't need to get a motherboard with some extra internal USB headers. The buttons themselves are quite nice, but I don't really like the positioning of the I/O that much. So they put it on the right side of the top of the case and then a bit further to the back. So if the case is on the desk next to you or even under your desk, it will be a bit harder to reach these buttons. I mean, it is a minor thing and it is pretty subjective, but I still think that it's worth mentioning, especially if you use the I/O a lot or if you have very limited space for your case. It is fairly easy to open the case up. The glass is held by screws in the back, and then you just pretty much click it out, while the cutout on the side panel doesn't have any screws at all. You just pull it and click it out as well, and now you have access to both compartments. In the front compartment, there is a motherboard tray with the same curve as the outside, staying true to the design. The specs say that this is an ATX case, but larger eATX motherboards will fit as well, and you also get the option for back connect motherboards, which is what I used for this build, but I'm going to talk about the build a bit later. You can fit 120mm fan in the back, 3 140mm fans in the top and in the bottom, and 3 120mm fans on the side. And keep in mind, the case doesn't come with any fans by default, which is just ridiculous for a $400 case. I mean, I understand the argument that users that are ready to pay this much for a case will also buy their own fans, but I just cannot accept that you're supposed to pay that much without expecting a decent performance out of the box. And MSI does have some nice fans they can add, so in my opinion, they should definitely rethink about including a couple of fans. Now, if you go for water cooling, you can fit a 360mm radiator on the top, bottom, and side. And if you go for air cooling, you can fit an air cooler up to 170 millimeters in height, so you have plenty of options there. For the GPU, you have up to 430 millimeters space, so pretty much all GPUs will fit easily. Now, the default here is a vertical orientation, and the case does come with a nice riser that you need to mount your GPU vertically. But of course, if you prefer, you can go with a typical horizontal orientation as well. The back compartment behind the motherboard has enough space for a power supply, some storage, and all the cables you need. Now, you are a little bit more restricted in what you can reach through that cutout, but it is a large space, so it won't be much of an issue. And then especially so if you don't need hard drives, and you can use the space above the power supply for some really lazy cable management. So it all looks nice and clean, but I still feel like some things are missing for the price that you're paying. Now, aside from the fans that I already mentioned, you don't get a fan hub, you don't get an RGB hub, and even the holes on the motherboard tray don't have any grommets to hide the cables nicely. So the only extra accessory next to the GPU riser is a GPU holder, and that's it. So I do miss something extra to set this case apart, and then especially so considering its price. Anyway, I always try to keep the build limited to one brand as much as possible, and since the case has back connect support, I went with the Z790 Project Zero motherboard, which limits the number of cables that we can see from the front. It's not even that expensive for a Z790 motherboard, but it still has the VRMs you need for the Intel Core i9-14900KS that I use for this build. Plus, you get plenty of storage options and plenty of USB connections in the back. To cool the CPU, I use the MSI CoreLiquid S360 water cooler that fits nicely on the top and comes with a large display that you can, of course, customize to your liking. Now, MSI doesn't make memory modules, or at least not yet, so I use this Kingston Fury DDR5 memory. And for the GPU, I use the RTX 4080 Super Suprim X. It fills the space nicely, it doesn't sit too close to the glass, and the design just goes great with this case. Now, I do want to go slightly off topic here for a second and just complain a bit about the lack of consistency between MSI's motherboard and GPU designs. Now, ASUS, for example, does that right with the matching ROG motherboards and GPUs and their tough gaming motherboards and GPUs, while MSI here doesn't really have a line that has both. And it would be so nice to see a Suprim motherboard, for example, to go with this GPU, or a Unify GPU, for example, to go with their Unify motherboards. And now I know that they're just split into several divisions within the company, and that the motherboard development and design are completely separate from their GPU development and design. But I just think it would be so nice to have something that is matching. Since this case doesn't come with any fans, I use these new MSI EZ120 addressable RGB fans that are quite nice actually. They are magnetic, you can daisy chain them, and they come with a controller. And just like the case, a magnetic daisy chain fan isn't really original, but it is a very solid product, and it is noticeably nicer than all of their previous fans. To power it all up, I use this MEG AI 1300p power supply. Now, 1300 watts is a complete overkill for an i9 RTX 4080 Super build, but it is the only MSI power supply I had, and I really wanted to brand match as much as possible. It is only 160 millimeters long, so it fits easily, and its 12-volt high power connection can sustain 600 watts, so it will be ready for the future generation of graphics cards as well. But let's see how this build performs. In a CPU-only stress test with a fan set to 40 decibels at a 50 centimeter distance, which is a reasonable noise level for a system under load, and with the CPU pulling about 250 watts on average, using Intel's new default power profiles, the processor sat at around 90 degrees Celsius, which is pretty hot, but also expected for this CPU. Since the GPU wasn't really doing that much in a CPU-only stress test, it wasn't really getting warm either. The VRMs were at 65 degrees, and the memory and SSD were just over 50 degrees. Now, the internal case temperature was a bit higher than I expected it to be. I measured it at 2 different points this time around, in the middle of the case and between the socket and the memory, which is where I usually test. And that second sensor hit 39 degrees Celsius, which is a bit higher than I expected it to be from a case with this many fans and without the GPU being used. Now, the sensor in the middle of the case was noticeably cooler. Now, while playing Cyberpunk 2077, which stresses both the GPU and the CPU was pulling around 150 watts and sat just under 70 degrees, while the RTX 4080 Super was pulling 300 watts with 64 degrees on the cores, 74 degrees on the hotspot, and 86 degrees Celsius on the memory. So the GPU cooling is more than fine. But the case temperature, again, is still a bit higher than I would like it to be. Now, from the middle of the case, it's clear that these fans are moving more than enough air, but the area around the socket still stays on the warmer side with 45 degrees Celsius between the socket and the memory. And that is technically still fine. I just like to keep 40 degrees Celsius as a good target for the temperature between the socket and the memory, which many airflow focused cases will easily hit. So this case runs a bit warmer, and if all you care about is thermal performance, you can find $100 cases that will cool this exact build much better. Now, of course, you can probably improve the airflow by changing some of the fan orientations around and seeing what works best, but keep in mind, this case doesn't come with any fans at all, so any improvement depends on the extras that you are prepared to buy additionally. Either way, the results are not the best, but they're also not that bad, so it can definitely cool a proper high-end build good enough while remaining quiet. So I don't think ultimate performance was the main goal here in the first place, and they were mostly going for the looks. I do feel like this case benefits from having some RGB fans, as the glass is a little bit on the darker side, but it also makes it easier to hide some extra cables you might have, or the fact that the motherboard is a bit of a different color than the GPU. It is also one of the nicest and sturdiest panorama style cases I've seen so far in terms of material use, and it really looks and feels high-end when you see it and when you experience it in person. But would you pay $400 or euros for this case? Now, for most people, $400 cases will never make sense, and that is completely fine. Plus, there's definitely plenty of things that they could have done better to make it easier to justify this price. They could have added some EZ120 fans, they could have included some fan hubs, they could have included some RGB hubs, some grommets in the motherboard tray, for example, or by making it a proper limited edition case like the number on the back suggests. So there are plenty of well-based arguments to make here. But at the end of the day, you need to decide what matters to you, because if you love this case and you love this design and you don't care about the downsides I mentioned in this video and you have $400 to spare, just go for it. Now, that's all I had for today, but before I go, let's check out the sponsor of this video. This video was brought to you by Seasonic and their Vertex power supplies. These fully modular power supplies are extremely efficient and very quiet due to their fan design and their hybrid fan mode that stops the fans completely under 40% load. They come with a variety of connections for any kind of system you have in mind, including the 12-volt high-power cable for the latest NVIDIA graphics cards. And to wrap it all up, they now offer a nice and cozy 12-year-long warranty. Check them out using the links in the description below. Thank you all for watching and for staying to the end of this video. If you liked it and you really want to see more content like this one, do consider clicking that subscribe button so you never miss my future uploads. Bye guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!